The enormous dome of the Galactic Council stretched above like a crystal cathedral, its transparent walls revealing the infinite darkness of space beyond. Captain David Ross stood alone in the center of the vast chamber, his hands bound with energy shackles that hummed with deadly power. Around him, rising in endless circles toward the dome's peak, sat the representatives of nearly 300 alien species. The sight was overwhelming. Creatures with multiple heads clicked and chittered in languages that sounded like grinding metal. Floating beings of pure energy pulsed with colors that hurt human eyes to witness. Massive insectoid delegates scraped their claws against polished stone seats while serpentine ambassadors coiled around crystalline perches designed for their unique anatomy. This was the heart of galactic civilization, the governing body that controlled over 50,000 inhabited worlds across the galaxy. And they had summoned Earth's first diplomatic representative not for welcome, but for judgment. High Counselor Thane, a towering being with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, leaned forward on his throne of carved meteor stone. His voice boomed through translation devices that made his words understandable to every species present. Human David Ross of the world called Earth, you stand before the Galactic Council accused of the most serious crime imaginable. Your species has been found guilty of spreading false information about galactic threats, deliberately causing panic among peaceful civilizations, and worst of all, attempting to manipulate this council through deception. David remained perfectly still, his gray eyes scanning the assembled masses with careful attention. He had volunteered for this mission, knowing it would likely be his last day alive, but something in his calm expression suggested he held information the council had not yet considered. The evidence against your primitive species is overwhelming, continued Counselor Thane. For the past year, human ships have been transmitting warnings about an alleged threat called the Shadow Fleet. You claim these entities are approaching our galaxy with hostile intent, demanding that all civilizations prepare for invasion. A wave of angry sounds rippled through the chamber. Delegates from dozens of species made gestures that clearly indicated their displeasure with humanity's actions. However, Thane's voice grew even more severe. Our most advanced deep space sensors detect nothing. Our exploration fleets report no unusual activity beyond the galactic rim. Your shadow fleet simply does not exist, David finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly despite the chamber's enormous size. Honorable Counselor, before you pass final judgment on my species, may I ask one simple question? Thane's 4 eyes narrowed with suspicion. You are hardly in a position to make requests, human. Of course not, David agreed with surprising politeness. But surely even condemned prisoners deserve to satisfy their curiosity. I'm simply wondering whether any member of this distinguished council has personally investigated the regions where humanity detected Shadow Fleet activity. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and David noticed more than a few exchanging worried glances. Your fabricated evidence requires no investigation, declared Ambassador Vex of the Korthak Empire, his tentacles writhing with indignation. The Shadow Fleet is an obvious fiction designed to justify humanity's aggressive military expansion. David nodded thoughtfully, as if the ambassador had just confirmed something important. I see. And the 17 deep space monitoring stations that went silent along the rim territories 6 months ago? The ones humanity specifically warned this council about? Equipment failures, Ambassador Vex replied quickly. Nothing more than outdated technology finally breaking down in the harsh environment of deep space. Naturally, David said with a slight smile. And the distress signals we forwarded to this council from the outer colonies? The ones containing rather disturbing visual recordings of unknown vessels, obvious fabrications, Counselor Thane declared. Humanity lacks the technological sophistication for convincing digital manipulation. The irony of that statement was not lost on David, who filed it away for future reference. He straightened to his full height, his energy restraints preventing more dignified posture, but unable to diminish the quiet authority that suddenly radiated from him. Then I suppose you won't object if I activate the emergency signal my ship transmitted before your forces captured me. Thane's expression shifted from smug confidence to wary confusion. What signal? David touched a small device implanted behind his ear, and it began pulsing with soft blue light. The one that's been broadcasting humanity's complete intelligence assessment for the past 72 hours. The one that's been transmitting to very interested parties currently positioned just beyond your outermost sensor networks. The chamber erupted in alarm as delegates began shouting questions and demands for clarification. Their voices were suddenly overwhelmed by a new sound, a deep rhythmic thrumming that seemed to emerge from the space station's walls themselves. David's smile became genuinely warm as he looked up at the panicking council members. You see, distinguished delegates, the Shadow Fleet isn't just real. They're also quite punctual. And thanks to your systematic dismissal of humanity's warnings over the past year, they now know exactly where to find the largest concentration of advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The thrumming grew louder and more insistent. Through the chamber's transparent dome, the first dark shapes began moving across the starfield. These weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were massive, angular structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating holes in space itself as they moved. Impossible, whispered Counselor Thane, his four hands gripping his throne until the meteor stone began to crack. Our sensors detect nothing. How are they avoiding our detection networks? Quantum stealth technology, David explained calmly, apparently unaffected by the chaos erupting around him. They exist slightly out of phase with normal space-time. The more intensively you scan for them, the more effectively they hide. Humanity discovered this during our first encounter 8 months ago. Through the dome, they could see more Shadow Fleet vessels emerging from what appeared to be empty space. Each ship was larger than the Council's most powerful dreadnought, and their dark surfaces rippled with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Why aren't they attacking the human vessel? Demanded Delegate Crix of the hegemony, its mechanical voice distorted by static as unknown interference began affecting the station's systems. David glanced toward Earth's diplomatic ship, visible in the distance and bearing fresh damage from the Council's capture operation, but otherwise untouched by the approaching fleet. Recognition protocols. We've been developing them since first contact. The Shadow Fleet marks species they've encountered before. They can distinguish between potential allies, confirmed enemies, and he paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing with devastating calm and species that qualify as acceptable losses in their strategic calculations. The meaning of that statement sent a wave of terror through the assembled delegates. These dark ships weren't just advanced alien technology. They represented an intelligence that had been evaluating galactic civilization for months, making careful decisions about which species deserved to survive their arrival. High Counselor Thane finally understood the true scope of humanity's strategy. You've been negotiating with them. All those warnings, all those reports about outer rim attacks, you were coordinating with this Shadow Fleet. David's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held cold satisfaction. Humanity tried diplomacy first, Counselor. We came to this council with evidence, with warnings, with offers of cooperation against a mutual threat. You dismissed us as primitive warmongers, excluded us from your deliberations, and treated us like an infection to be contained. Another massive shape moved across the stars, this one close enough that its gravitational field caused the station's artificial gravity to fluctuate noticeably. So we chose a different path, David continued quietly. If the galaxy wouldn't accept humanity as an equal partner, we would ensure humanity's survival through alternative arrangements. The Galactic Council's emergency alarm shrieked through the crystal chamber as massive dark shapes moved across the starfield visible through the dome. These Shadow Fleet vessels defied every law of physics the Council understood. They moved without visible propulsion, turned without regard for momentum, and somehow managed to remain invisible to the most advanced sensors in the galaxy while being clearly visible to the naked eye. Captain David Ross watched the panic with professional detachment as alien delegates scrambled to coordinate their defenses. His energy restraints had mysteriously deactivated when the Shadow Fleet arrived, though he made no move to escape. There was nowhere to run, and more importantly, he had work to finish. All tactical networks are experiencing massive system failures, reported Admiral Korth of the Trilaxian Defense Force, her multiple tentacles dancing frantically across holographic controls. Our targeting computers can't achieve lock on any of the approaching vessels. David nodded with approval. Phase variance technology. Their ships exist partially outside normal spacetime, which makes conventional weapons essentially useless. Another detail we mentioned in our reports to this council, the ones you classified as primitive human fantasies. Through the dome, They watched the first Shadow Fleet vessel extend what appeared to be scanning beams toward the Council station. Where the dark energy touched the outer hull, sections simply disappeared, not destroyed or vaporized but erased from existence as if they had never been built. Molecular disintegration, David explained to the horrified delegates. They can selectively edit matter at the quantum level. Very precise, very efficient, and completely unstoppable with current galactic technology. High Counselor Thane's voice cracked with barely controlled terror. How many ships are out there? David appeared to consult some internal calculation. The advance force number's approximately 200 vessels. But they're just the scouts. The main fleet contains over 3,000 ships, each one capable of sterilizing an entire star system within hours. The number hit the Council chamber like a physical blow. 3,000 ships with planet-killing capability, commanded by an intelligence that had been studying galactic civilization while remaining completely undetected. What do they want? Demanded Ambassador Vex, his tentacles now pale with fear instead of righteous anger. What any apex predator wants, David replied. Territory, resources, and the elimination of potential threats to their expansion. The Shadow Fleet has been evaluating galactic civilization for over a year, studying your military capabilities, political structures, and technological advancement. He gestured toward the tactical displays showing Council defense fleets moving to intercept the Shadow vessels. Your fleets are impressive by galactic standards, but the Shadow Fleet has technology that's roughly 3,000 years more advanced than your most sophisticated weapons. As if to prove his point, one of the Council's heavy cruisers fired a full spread of antimatter torpedoes at the nearest Shadow vessel. The dark ship simply absorbed the weapons without any visible effect, then responded with a single pulse of black energy that caused the cruiser to collapse in on itself until it vanished into a point of light. Gravitational compression, David noted clinically. They can manipulate space-time to create localized black holes. Very effective against conventional matter. The demonstration had its intended effect. Other Council ships immediately ceased their attacks and began retreat maneuvers, though the Shadow Fleet made no move to pursue them. Why did humanity survive first contact with these entities? Asked Delegate Crix, its mechanical voice processing the implications of human survival. We didn't try to fight them, David answered simply. When our deep space exploration ships encountered Shadow Fleet scouts 8 months ago, we observed, documented, and when they made their intentions clear, we opened diplomatic channels. Counselor Thane turned from the displays showing his disintegrating fleet to stare at the human captain. You negotiated with these destroyers? The Shadow Fleet isn't interested in mindless destruction, Counselor. They're expanding into this galaxy because their own galaxy has become overcrowded. They need living space, but they prefer not to waste useful resources during the acquisition process. A massive explosion lit up the star field as another Council vessel attempted a ramming attack. The Shadow ship it targeted simply phased out of normal space-time, allowing the Council vessel to pass harmlessly through its position before rematerializing and continuing its approach to the station. They view the current galactic civilization as inefficient, David continued. Too many species competing for the same resources, too much energy wasted on internal conflicts, too little cooperation on large-scale projects. They're offering to optimize the system. The implication struck the Council like a second wave of terror. Ambassador Vex's tentacles writhed with agitation. Optimize? What does that mean? Restructuring. Some species will be relocated to more suitable worlds. Others will have their populations adjusted to sustainable levels. Military buildups will be discontinued and resources redirected toward productive activities. David paused, studying the horrified faces around him before delivering the final blow. And species that prove too aggressive or too resistant to integration will be removed from the equation entirely. Through the chamber's dome, they could see more Shadow Fleet vessels arriving, their dark forms blotting out entire sections of stars. The newcomers were even larger than the first wave, and their energy signatures made nearby space itself appear to ripple and bend. Command vessels, David observed with satisfaction. The fleet commanders are arriving to oversee the transition process. Transition to what? Admiral Korth's voice barely qualified as a whisper. To a more efficient galactic order. The Shadow Fleet has studied your civilizations extensively. They've identified the primary sources of instability, resource waste, and territorial conflict. Their solution is comprehensive reorganization. Under unified command, the chamber fell silent, except for the distant sounds of structural failure as the station continued to experience phase variance effects from the approaching fleet. Finally, Counselor Thane found his voice. What role does humanity play in this reorganization? David's smile returned, but now it carried the cold authority of someone speaking for a superior power. Humanity demonstrated the intelligence to recognize superior force and the wisdom to negotiate rather than resist. The Shadow Fleet values these qualities. He activated his neural implant, and immediately the chaotic interference affecting the station's systems began to stabilize. The Shadow Fleet's phase variance technology adjusted to allow normal electronics to function, though clearly remaining ready to disable them again if necessary. We've been designated as liaison species, David announced. Humanity will serve as intermediaries between the Shadow Fleet and galactic civilization during the transition period. We'll help identify which species can adapt to the new order and which ones represent unacceptable risks. Admiral Korth stared at the human captain with growing horror. You're going to help them decide who lives and who dies. We're going to help them optimize galactic civilization for long-term stability and prosperity, David corrected. The current system is unsustainable. Constant warfare, resource depletion, overpopulation in some sectors, and extinction in others. The Shadow Fleet offers a solution. High Counselor Thane's forehands clenched into fists. You orchestrated this entire crisis. The warnings, the evidence, even the timing of this council session. Everything was designed to bring them here. David's expression showed no remorse whatsoever. Humanity tried to warn this council about the Shadow Fleet's approach 10 months ago. You ignored our evidence, dismissed our ambassadors, and treated us like ignorant primitives unworthy of serious consideration. The lights in the chamber flickered as another massive shadow vessel moved overhead, its gravitational field affecting the station's power grid. So we made sure you would have no choice but to take us seriously. David continued. The Shadow Fleet was coming regardless of humanity's involvement. Our choice was to be victims of their expansion or partners in their reorganization. Through the chamber's communication systems, a new voice began speaking. It was clearly artificial, but carried harmonics that somehow conveyed vast intelligence and absolute authority. The translation system struggled with the complex mathematical concepts embedded in the communication. The Shadow Fleet Command extends greetings to the Galactic Council, the voice announced. Preliminary assessment of your civilization is complete. Reorganization protocols will begin immediately. Species designated for preservation will receive relocation instructions within 1 standard day. Species designated for adjustment will undergo population optimization procedures. Species designated for removal will be processed efficiently and humanely. David stood and straightened his uniform. His role as prisoner now clearly ended. The Shadow Fleet is prepared to discuss terms with any species willing to cooperate with the new order. They've found humanity to be reasonable negotiating partners, and they're hoping other species will demonstrate similar wisdom. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after the Shadow Fleet's arrival, but the crystal chamber looked nothing like its former grandeur. Emergency repair drones worked frantically to seal hull breaches, where phase variance technology had selectively removed sections of the station. Backup power systems cast everything in harsh emergency lighting, while the main generators underwent complete reconstruction. Captain David Ross now sat at the primary negotiation table, no longer a prisoner, but clearly the most important person in the room. Beside him sat Dr. Lisa Morgan, humanity's leading expert on Shadow Fleet technology, and Commander Alex Kane, who monitored communication equipment that hummed with frequencies no other species could detect or interpret. High Counselor Thane looked like he had aged decades overnight. His obsidian skin had lost its polished shine, and his forearms trembled slightly as he addressed the greatly reduced assembly. Less than half the original delegates remained, with many having fled on ships that somehow escaped the Shadow Fleet's initial blockade. The outer territories are gone, Thane reported to those who stayed. 63 inhabited systems have been processed. The Shadow Fleet maintains complete control of all hyperspace routes while they establish their administrative centers. Dr. Morgan looked up from her data tablets, which displayed information and symbols that shifted and changed as she watched. The processing pattern shows remarkable efficiency. They're targeting systems based on strategic value, resource density, and population compliance assessments. The selection criteria indicate careful long-term planning rather than random conquest. "How long have they been watching us?" asked Ambassador Vex, his tentacles now showing the pale coloration that indicated extreme stress among his species. "Based on the intelligence depth they've demonstrated, we estimate minimum observation period of 18 months, Dr. Morgan replied. "Possibly longer. They've shown detailed knowledge of internal political structures, military capabilities, and even cultural preferences that would require extensive study." The revelation sent a wave of unease through the remaining delegates. 18 months of undetected observation meant the Shadow Fleet understood galactic civilization better than most species understood themselves. Commander Kane's communication array chimed with incoming data, and he pressed a translation device to his ear. After several moments of listening, he nodded to David. "Fleet Command is ready to present formal reorganization terms." David stood and activated a holographic projector that displayed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Different colored zones marked the Shadow Fleet's intended administrative divisions. "The Shadow Fleet has completed their assessment of current galactic civilization," David announced to the silent chamber. "They've identified multiple critical inefficiencies that threaten long-term stability and resource sustainability." He gestured, and the display zoomed in on the galactic core worlds. "First, resource allocation. Current distribution systems are approximately 37% efficient. The Shadow Fleet requires minimum 75% efficiency for sustainable administration. We have trade agreements and resource sharing protocols," protested Admiral Korth. Dr. Morgan consulted her shifting data tablets. "Your current agreements cover less than half of available resources and include significant waste factors due to transportation inefficiencies and political complications. The Shadow Fleet proposes centralized distribution based on actual need rather than political influence." The display shifted to show military installations throughout the galaxy. Second, defensive redundancy. Current weapons stockpiles represent massive resource waste. The Shadow Fleet calculates that existing armaments could be reduced by 80% without compromising legitimate security needs. Counselor Thane's voice carried bitter irony. "Security against what threats? You've just demonstrated that our weapons are useless against truly advanced technology." "Exactly the point," David replied. "Galactic civilization has been preparing to fight itself, rather than focusing on advancement and exploration. The Shadow Fleet offers protection from external threats while redirecting military resources toward productive development." Commander Kane received another transmission and relayed the information to David. "Fleet Command is also concerned about population dynamics. 17 species currently exceed sustainable reproduction rates while 31 others face potential extinction due to habitat loss." The holographic display now showed population density charts across the galaxy. Some regions glowed red with overcrowding while others showed the pale indicators of dying civilizations. "The Shadow Fleet proposes managed relocation and reproduction protocols," David continued. "Overcrowded species will be distributed to suitable worlds with better resources. Endangered species will receive protected status and assisted reproduction programs." "And who determines these policies?" demanded Delegate Crix, its mechanical voice processing the implications. David's expression remained professionally neutral. "The Shadow Fleet Command, with advisory input from species that demonstrate cooperation and understanding of galactic optimization principles." The full scope of humanity's strategy was becoming clear. They hadn't just survived first contact with the Shadow Fleet. They had positioned themselves as essential partners in reshaping galactic civilization according to completely alien priorities. "This is conquest disguised as administration," growled Ambassador Vex. "This is evolution," Dr. Morgan replied calmly. "Galactic civilization has reached a critical decision point. You can adapt to sustainable practices under Shadow Fleet guidance, or continue current patterns until resource collapse makes civilization impossible." Commander Kane stood and moved to a secondary display showing real-time fleet positions throughout the galaxy. "Speaking of adaptation, Fleet Command has requested immediate implementation of the first phase. They've identified specific species that pose unacceptable risks to galactic stability." The display highlighted territories belonging to the hegemony of Steel, the Vorthak Empire, and the Korthak Dominion. three of the most militaristic and aggressive civilizations in known space. The hegemony will undergo complete technological restructuring, David announced without emotion. Their artificial intelligence networks will be integrated with Shadow Fleet systems to prevent autonomous military development. The Vorthak Empire will be relocated to a single star system under direct Shadow Fleet supervision. The Korthak Dominion will be dissolved as a political entity due to their documented history of genocidal expansion. Ambassador Vex rose from his seat, his tentacles writhing with rage and terror. The Korthak have existed for over 2,000 years. You cannot simply eliminate an entire civilization. The Shadow Fleet can and will eliminate civilizations that pose threats to galactic stability, David responded. The Korthak expansion model is based on complete displacement of existing populations. This behavior pattern is incompatible with sustainable galactic administration. The mathematical precision of the Shadow Fleet's assessments was becoming apparent. They had evaluated every major civilization and made calculated decisions based on long-term stability rather than current political relationships. What about species that resist these changes? Admiral Korth asked quietly. Dr. Morgan closed her data tablets and looked at the Admiral with something approaching sympathy. Resistance indicates failure to understand optimization principles. The Shadow Fleet has contingency protocols for dealing with species that cannot adapt to administrative requirements. David reactivated the galactic map, this time showing projected outcomes based on Shadow Fleet reorganization. Red zones would be completely restructured with new populations. Yellow zones would undergo managed development under strict resource controls. Green zones would serve as preserve areas for endangered species and critical ecosystems. Humanity offers our experience as a guide for successful adaptation, David said, his voice carrying absolute authority. We've learned to work with Shadow Fleet priorities rather than against them. The results have been beneficial for both human civilization and galactic stability. What exactly did humanity gain from this cooperation? Counselor Thane asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Commander Kane smiled for the first time since the negotiations began. Guaranteed survival, technological advancement, and administrative authority over species integration processes. The Shadow Fleet recognizes humanity's talent for strategic thinking and cultural adaptation. And in return, Admiral Korth pressed, we provide intelligence on galactic civilization, assist with species evaluation, and help implement optimization protocols, David replied. It's a mutually beneficial partnership that ensures both human survival and galactic improvement. The choice facing the remaining council members was becoming impossibly clear. They could cooperate with Shadow Fleet reorganization and possibly preserve some form of their civilizations, or they could resist and face the same fate as species already designated for elimination. How long do we have to decide? Counselor Thane asked, his voice barely audible above the emergency system still working to repair the station. Commander Kane checked his communication array and spoke briefly with David before turning back to the transformation began at exactly 0000 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Across 3,000 star systems, Shadow Fleet administrative vessels assumed positions above inhabited worlds and began what they termed optimization implementation. The Galactic Council Chamber, now serving as a coordination center for species compliance, buzzed with activity as reports flooded in from every corner of known space. Captain David Ross stood before a massive holographic display showing real-time updates from across the galaxy. Green indicators marked worlds accepting Shadow Fleet administration. Yellow showed systems undergoing negotiated transitions. Red indicated active resistance. The pattern was disturbingly clear. Species that had embraced militaristic expansion showed almost universal red markings. Dr. Lisa Morgan coordinated information flows from her station. Her enhanced data tablets now directly interfaced with Shadow Fleet communication networks. The hegemony of Steel's artificial intelligence networks are rejecting integration protocols, she reported. Their machines are actively fighting the optimization process. Expected resistance, David replied, making notes on his own interface. The hegemony built their entire civilization around autonomous military systems. Integration threatens their fundamental power structure. Commander Alex Kane monitored tactical communications as Shadow Fleet vessels responded to resistance across multiple sectors. Fleet Command is implementing containment protocols around hegemony territory. No ships in or out until integration is complete. Through the chamber's repaired dome, they could see the massive Shadow Fleet administrative station that had grown around the original Council facility. The dark structure pulsed with energy patterns that seemed to bend space itself, creating a command center that existed partially outside normal physics. High Counselor Thane approached the human delegation, his forearms moving in gestures that indicated both respect and deep unease. The reports from Vorthak territory are concerning. Their entire population has been relocated to a single world, but the conditions there seem barely adequate for survival. David consulted his data feeds before responding. The Shadow Fleet is testing Vorthak adaptability under resource constraints. Their historical expansion pattern indicates overconsumption tendencies. The current conditions will determine whether they can learn sustainable practices or require more direct intervention. The clinical nature of David's response clearly disturbed the counselor, but he continued. And the Korthek Dominion? We've lost all communication with their territory. Processing is proceeding on schedule, Dr. Morgan answered without looking up from her displays. The Korthak leadership structure has been dissolved and population centers are being evaluated for relocation or integration into other administrative zones. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that processing likely meant the end of Korthak civilization as an independent entity. Their documented history of genocidal expansion had marked them for elimination in the Shadow Fleet's optimization calculations. Commander Kane's equipment chimed with an incoming priority transmission. He listened intently before turning to address the room. We have a new development. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures from the galactic edge. Something is coming through from intergalactic space. David immediately activated his neural interface, connecting directly with Shadow Fleet command networks. The response was instantaneous, a flood of concern mixed with predatory anticipation. For several moments, he remained motionless as information flowed through the connection. Fleet Command has detected the approach of what appears to be another intelligent species, David announced to the chamber. Energy signatures suggest technology comparable to or exceeding Shadow Fleet capabilities. The implication struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The Shadow Fleet had seemed invincible, but now they faced potential contact with entities that might rival their power. Are they hostile? Asked Admiral Korth, her tentacles pale with renewed fear. David's expression showed the strain of processing complex information through his neural link. Unknown. The approaching vessels are maintaining communication silence, and their technology prevents detailed scanning. Fleet Command is concerned. Ambassador Vex, one of the few surviving original council members, stepped forward. Does this change the optimization process? Fleet Command is accelerating implementation schedules, Dr. Morgan reported. Her data tablets now showing urgent priority markings across multiple sectors. They want Galactic Administration fully established before making contact. With the new arrivals, the acceleration meant that species still undergoing evaluation would face immediate decisions about cooperation or elimination. There would be no more time for gradual adaptation or negotiated transitions. The resistance movements are taking advantage of Fleet Command's distraction, Commander Kane observed, watching tactical displays that showed increased military activity in several sectors. Some species are interpreting the new arrivals as potential allies against Shadow Fleet administration. David disconnected from his neural link and turned to address the chamber with unmistakable authority. Fleet Command has requested that humanity assume expanded administrative responsibilities during this transition period. We're being given direct authority over species evaluation and integration processes. The scope of humanity's rise to power was staggering. In less than 2 standard days, they had gone from ignored primitives to administrators of galactic civilization. What does that mean for species still undergoing evaluation? Counselor Thane asked. It means humanity will make the final decisions about which civilizations can adapt to Shadow Fleet administration and which ones pose unacceptable risks, David replied. We'll be responsible for implementing optimization protocols across all sectors. Dr. Morgan stood and activated a new holographic display showing detailed assessments of every known species. We've been conducting evaluation studies for months, analyzing cultural patterns, military doctrines, and adaptive capabilities. Some species show excellent potential for integration. Others, She highlighted several civilizations whose markings had shifted to red. Others have demonstrated behavioral patterns that make them incompatible with stable galactic administration. Commander Kane received another urgent transmission, and his expression became grave as he processed the information. The new arrivals have begun active scanning of galactic territories. Fleet Command is detecting probe vessels conducting detailed reconnaissance of Shadow Fleet positions. Are we looking at another invasion? Admiral Korth asked. David reactivated his neural connection for a brief consultation before responding. Fleet Command believes the new arrivals are evaluating Shadow Fleet capabilities, possibly preparing for territorial negotiations. But they're also scanning inhabited worlds, which suggests interest in galactic civilization itself. The possibility that galactic civilization might become a bargaining chip between two advanced species was terrifying. The Shadow Fleet had at least shown interest in preserving useful populations. These new entities might have completely different priorities. What can we do to prepare? Counselor Thane asked. Continue cooperation with optimization protocols, David answered. Species that demonstrate successful integration with Shadow Fleet administration will be viewed as valuable assets during any negotiations. Species that resist or remain unproductive. He didn't need to finish the statement. In negotiations between cosmic powers, resistant populations would likely be considered acceptable losses. There's one more factor to consider, Dr. Morgan added, consulting data that seemed to flow across her tablets in real time. The new arrivals are showing particular interest in sectors where resistance movements are active. They may be evaluating military capabilities or looking for potential allies against Shadow Fleet control. The irony was devastating. Species resisting Shadow Fleet optimization might inadvertently attract the attention of entities that could be far worse. Their defiance could mark them as useful tools in a larger conflict. Fleet Command wants all administrative transitions completed within 72 hours, Commander Kane announced. After that deadline, any species not fully integrated will be classified as security risks and dealt with accordingly. Through the dome, they could see Shadow Fleet vessels moving to new positions throughout the system. The massive ships were clearly preparing for potential conflict while simultaneously accelerating their administrative takeover of galactic civilization. The next few days will determine the future of every species in the galaxy, David said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Humanity will do everything possible to preserve civilizations that demonstrate wisdom and adaptability. What he didn't say, but everyone understood, was that species failing to demonstrate those qualities would face extinction, regardless of their historical achievements or cultural value. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when cosmic powers competed for control of inhabited space. The age of independent civilization was ending faster than anyone had imagined, and humanity would decide which species deserved to see whatever came next. The moment of contact came 68 hours after the first intergalactic vessels appeared at the galaxy's edge. Captain David Ross stood in the Shadow Fleet's administrative center, watching through phase-shifted viewports as impossible ships materialized in normal space around the galactic core. These new arrivals defied every assumption about starship design. They appeared to be constructed from crystallized energy that shifted between solid matter and pure light. Dr. Lisa Morgan worked frantically at her enhanced interface as data streams flowed between the Shadow Fleet and the new entities. They're calling themselves the Architects, she reported, her voice tight with concentration. They claim this galaxy falls within their territorial expansion zone. Commander Alex Kane monitored communications as 3 different cosmic powers attempted to establish contact protocols. The Architects are requesting immediate cessation of all Shadow Fleet administrative activities. They're demanding that galactic civilization be preserved in its current state for their own evaluation. The implications were staggering. Galactic civilization had become a disputed resource between entities that viewed entire star systems as administrative units. High Counselor Thane approached the human delegation with an expression of desperate hope. Does this mean the optimization process will stop? Can our civilizations return to independence? David activated his neural connection to Shadow Fleet Command, his consciousness expanding to process communications flowing between cosmic intelligences. When he emerged from the link, his expression showed the strain of translating concepts that barely fit within human understanding. The Shadow Fleet is not withdrawing their territorial claims, he announced. They've invested significant resources in galactic optimization and consider the process too valuable to abandon. However, they're willing to negotiate territorial division with the architects. Dr. Morgan looked up from data that seemed to shift between mathematical formulas and architectural blueprints. The architects are proposing a partition agreement. They want control of the galactic core worlds while allowing Shadow Fleet administration of the outer territories. What about the species caught between them? Admiral Korth asked, her tentacles showing the stress patterns that indicated approaching psychological breakdown. That's where it gets complicated, Commander Kane replied, monitoring tactical feeds that showed both fleets maneuvering for strategic advantage. Each side wants to demonstrate the effectiveness of their administrative methods. They're turning galactic civilization into a test case for competing management philosophies. Through the administrative center's impossible viewports, they could see representatives from both cosmic powers approaching in vessels that seemed to ignore basic physics. The Shadow Fleet delegation traveled in ships that existed partially outside spacetime, while the architect representatives rode constructs of pure crystallized energy. Humanity has been requested to serve as intermediary for the negotiations, David announced, his role as liaison expanding beyond anything previously imagined. Both sides recognize our experience with galactic civilization and our demonstrated ability to facilitate complex transitions. The true scope of humanity's strategy was finally becoming clear. They hadn't just survived contact with cosmic powers. They had positioned themselves as indispensable mediators between entities that could reshape the galaxy at will. What are the terms being discussed? Counselor Thane asked. Dr. Morgan consulted information that flowed across her displays in patterns too complex for non-enhanced minds to follow. The Shadow Fleet wants to complete optimization of species they consider salvageable, while transferring resources from eliminated civilizations to sustainable development projects. The architects prefer preservation of existing cultural structures while implementing gradual technological advancement under their guidance. Both approaches require significant species evaluation and relocation, Commander Kane added. The difference is methodology, not outcome. Either way, most civilizations will face fundamental changes to their social structures and territorial boundaries. David stood and activated the chamber's main holographic display, which now showed the galaxy divided into 3 distinct zones. Humanity has proposed a compromise solution that both sides are considering. The display revealed a 3-way partition that seemed to account for every major civilization's adaptive capabilities and resource requirements. The Shadow Fleet will administer the Outer Rim territories, focusing on species that require intensive restructuring and resource optimization. The architects will control the core worlds, preserving civilizations that demonstrate stable cultural development. And the Middle territories, David paused, allowing the full implications to register before continuing. The Middle territories will be administered jointly by both powers, with humanity serving as the primary coordination species for interzone relations and resource management. The arrangement gave humanity effective control over the most strategically valuable region of the galaxy while ensuring their essential role in any future cosmic politics. This is unprecedented, whispered Ambassador Vex. No species has ever achieved such a position between cosmic powers. No species has ever demonstrated such strategic foresight, David replied. When humanity first detected the Shadow Fleet's approach, we immediately began preparing for exactly this scenario. We studied their expansion patterns, developed communication protocols, and positioned ourselves as valuable partners rather than potential victims. Dr. Morgan stood and moved to a secondary display showing detailed implementation schedules. The partition agreement includes specific protections for species that demonstrate adaptation potential. Civilizations that cooperate with optimization protocols will be preserved and given opportunities to advance under cosmic guidance. And those that resist? Admiral Korth asked, though she clearly dreaded the answer. Resistance indicates failure to understand cosmic-scale civilization management, Commander Kane answered. Species that cannot adapt to either Shadow Fleet optimization or architect preservation protocols will be recycled. Their resources will be redistributed to civilizations that show better potential for long-term stability. The clinical nature of cosmic administration was becoming apparent. From the perspective of entities that managed multiple galaxies, individual species were simply resources to be optimized for maximum efficiency. "How much time do we have to adapt?" Counselor Thane asked. David consulted his neural interface one final time before responding. "Implementation begins immediately. Species evaluation teams from both cosmic powers are already being deployed to assess every civilization in the galaxy. The process should be complete within 1 standard year." Through the administrative center's viewports, they could see massive construction projects beginning throughout the star system. The cosmic powers were building permanent facilities that would serve as administrative centers for their new territorial divisions. What should species do to maximize their survival chances? Admiral Korth asked. Dr. Morgan accessed data that seemed to contain the accumulated wisdom of multiple galactic civilizations. Demonstrate adaptability, resource efficiency, and cooperative behavior. Both cosmic powers value species that can contribute to stable administration, rather than requiring constant supervision. Most importantly, David added, accept that the age of independent galactic civilization is over. The galaxy is now part of a larger cosmic community, and survival requires understanding your place in that hierarchy. Commander Kane received a final transmission and announced the conclusion of the negotiations. The partition agreement has been formally accepted by both powers. Implementation teams are being deployed to begin species evaluation and territorial restructuring. The transformation that had begun with humanity's warnings about the Shadow Fleet was reaching its conclusion. Galactic civilization would continue to exist, but under management by entities that operated on cosmic scales and timelines that spanned geological epochs. There is one final consideration, David said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Humanity's role as intermediary species gives us significant influence over evaluation processes. Species that have demonstrated cooperation and wisdom during this transition will receive favorable assessments. The message was clear. The future of every civilization in the galaxy now depended partially on how they had treated humanity during the crisis. Those who had dismissed human warnings or treated humanity as primitive would face less favorable evaluations than those who had shown respect and cooperation. High Counselor, Thane looked around the chamber at the remnants of what had once been the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. The Galactic Council ignored humanity's warnings, he said quietly. Now we beg for mercy from the species we dismissed as primitive. David's expression showed no satisfaction in the reversal, only professional assessment of political realities. The galaxy ignored humanity's warnings about cosmic threats. Now the galaxy will discover what happens when cosmic powers compete for administrative control over inhabited space. Through the impossible viewports, they could see ships from both cosmic fleets moving to establish permanent presence throughout the galaxy. The age of cosmic administration was beginning, and humanity,